The dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light of his small apartment, each a tiny ghost in the silent air. For Javier el Sombra Vargas, they were the only audience he tolerated now. He watched them from the depths of a worn leather armchair, a glass of dark Spanish brandy sweating in his hand. Outside, the vibrant life of Granada's Albaicin quarter tumbled down the hillside, the chatter of tourists, the distant, soulful cry of a flamenco guitar. But here, in his self-imposed exile, there was only the ghost of a roar, the ghost of red silk, the ghost of a man gored on the sand. Javier had once been the sun around which the world of bullfighting revolved. El Sombra, they called him, for the way he seemed to merge with the shadow of the bull, an elegant, deadly dance of perfect understanding. He wasn't a butcher. He was a psychologist, a master of presence. He could read the twitch of a bull's ear, the subtle shift of weight in its haunches, and know its intent before the beast itself did. That instinct, that almost supernatural connection, had made him a legend. It had also been his ruin. The last time he had stood on the sand, the sun had been merciless. A younger, brasher matador, Miguel, had sought glory, taking a risk Javier had warned him against. Javier had seen the bull's intent in a flicker of its eye, a feint, a trap. He had opened his mouth to shout, but the roar of the crowd had swallowed his voice. The memory was a brand on his soul, the sickening thud of horn against flesh, the crimson stain spreading across the gold-embroidered times, protégé de lucis asterisk. The life dimming in Miguel's eyes as Javier knelt beside him, his own hands slick with his friend's blood. He had felt the collective gasp of the plaza, the sudden, terrible silence. They weren't looking at Miguel anymore. They were looking at him, El Sombra, the master who had let death into the ring. He had retired in shame, trading the roar of the crowd for the silence of his ghosts. His life was now a ritual of containment. He ran a small, quiet bookshop specializing in historical texts, his interactions with customers brief and impersonal. He read the stoop of a shoulder, the nervous tap of a finger, the darting eyes, and knew their stories, their desires, their little lies. But he kept the knowledge to himself, a silent, useless god of observation. The sharp buzz of the intercom tore through the quiet. Javier ignored it. No one came for him. The buzzing persisted, insistent, angry. With a sigh that tasted of brandy and regret, he heaved himself from the chair and pressed the talk button. "What?" he growled. A reedy, breathless voice came through the speaker. "Package for Vargas. Leave it. Signature required." Cursing under his breath, Javier descended the cool stone steps. The courier was a young man, sweating in his uniform, oblivious to the fact that he was disturbing a tomb. Javier scribbled a meaningless signature and took the small, light parcel. Back in his apartment, he turned it over in his hands. It was nondescript brown paper, no return address. The postmark was from Granada. He tore it open. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a single object, a Times Pineta asterisk, the ornate comb that flamenco dancers wear in their hair. It was tortoiseshell, a design of cascading roses he recognized instantly. It was Sophia's, his sister. One of the delicate tines was snapped off, and near the break, a dark, coppery brown smear confirmed the dread coiling in his stomach. It was dried blood. Beneath the comb was a single, folded piece of heavy parchment. His hands trembled as he opened it. The script was elegant, arrogant, written in black ink. Asterisk, she is close to achieving true Duende. Asterisk, the word struck him like a physical blow. Asterisk, Duende, asterisk, the dark soul of art. The shiver down the spine, the inexplicable welling of tears, the raw, visceral connection to mortality that all great performers strive for. It was a word of beauty, of passion, of profound, untamable power. But written here, above his sister's broken and bloodied comb, it was a threat of the most profane kind. Sophia, his brilliant, fiery sister, a times bailaora times, whose talent was a wildfire. While Javier had retreated from the stage, she had thrown herself into its heart. He hadn't approved, had warned her of the darkness that lurked behind the curtain, the egos and obsessions that devoured young talent. But she had a fire that wouldn't be tamed. In their last conversation, weeks ago, she had been ecstatic, breathless. She'd been accepted into an exclusive avant-garde troupe, led by a visionary choreographer known only as El Maestro. She spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. A genius who was pushing the boundaries of flamenco, of art itself. "He understands, Javier," she'd said, her voice shimmering with passion. "He understands that it's not just about the steps, it's about what lies beneath, the pain, the truth." Now, that truth was a bloody smear on a broken comb. Javier placed the Times Pineta Times on the table, his matador's mind stripping away the grief, the panic, leaving only the cold, hard lines of the problem. This wasn't a ransom note. This was a statement, a piece of theater, a challenge. And Javier Vargas, El Sombra, knew better than anyone how to answer a challenge thrown down on a stage. He drained his glass, the fire of the brandy a pale imitation of the rage now burning in his chest. His retirement was over. He was going to get his sister back. The Albaicin was a labyrinth of memory. Every whitewashed wall, every cascade of bougainvillea, every narrow winding alley whispered of a past Javier had tried to bury. He moved through the streets like a phantom, his broad shoulders and predatory grace out of place among the tourists and bohemian artists. He was searching for a ghost of a different kind, a man who knew the city's dark, artistic underbelly better than anyone. He found him in a dimly lit bar tucked away in a forgotten plaza, the air thick with the scent of stale wine and bitter tobacco. Ricardo sat hunched over a guitar, his fingers, gnarled with age and arthritis, still coaxing a melody of exquisite sorrow from the strings. Ricardo's face was a roadmap of a hard-lived life. His eyes, sunken and weary, held the ghosts of 1,000 performances. He was a legend, a times toca war times whose music was said to be able to make angels weep and devils pray. He was also one of the few who had ever worked with El Maestro and walked away. Ricardo's music faltered as Javier's shadow fell over his table. He looked up, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before a cynical mask fell back into place. "El Sombra," Ricardo rasped, his voice like gravel. "I heard they buried you." "They didn't dig deep enough," Javier said, pulling up a chair. He slid the broken Times Pineta Times across the table. Ricardo's eyes, which had seen everything, fixed on the comb. His leathery skin seemed to pale. He didn't touch it, but his gnarled fingers tightened on the neck of his guitar. "Sophia," he whispered. "She joined his company," Javier said, his voice low and flat. "I need to find her." Ricardo let out a harsh, joyless laugh. "Find her? Boy, you don't find anyone in El Maestro's world. You only get invited, or you get consumed. You worked with him, you left." "I fled," Ricardo corrected, his gaze distant. "He is not a man, Vargas. He is a priest. His religion is art, and his sacrament is pain. He speaks of times Duende, times not as a feeling, a moment of grace, but as a destination, a place he can force an artist to go." Javier leaned forward, his presence filling the small space between them. "How does he do it?" Ricardo finally looked at him, his eyes holding a mixture of fear and a strange, disturbing flicker of awe. "He finds the cracks in you, the little fears, the secret shames, and he pries them open with his art. He uses techniques, isolation, days of endless, repetitive practice until the body is screaming and the mind is numb. Herbs in the tea that blur the edges of the world. He strips you down to nothing until the only thing left is the raw nerve of your talent. Then, he plays that nerve like a guitar string, Ricardo shuddered, a deep, visceral tremor. I saw what he did to them. The finest dancers, the most passionate singers. He would bring them to the edge of a cliff, make them stare into the abyss of their own mortality, all for a single perfect note. A single, flawless step. I told him it was madness. He told me it was God. Where is he, Ricardo? The old guitarist shook his head. It's not a place you can walk into. His tableau times, is private, invitation only. His patrons are wealthy, decadent. They don't come for a show. They come for a religious experience. They pay to watch a soul being stripped bare on stage. Then get me an invitation, Javier demanded. Ricardo looked away, tracing the rim of a smudged wine glass. It's not that simple. My sister's life is at stake. The old man was silent for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the bar's ancient refrigerator. Javier didn't push. He waited, his stillness a weapon. He had learned patience from a 1,000-pound beast of muscle and fury. He could outweight a broken old man. There is a performance, Ricardo finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Soon, a private debut. He believes he has found his masterpiece. The one who can finally achieve what he's been seeking. Javier's blood ran cold. Sofia. Ricardo nodded grimly. He will push her further than anyone, to the very brink, because her talent is the purest he has ever seen. The old man looked up, his eyes locking with Javier's. The fear was still there, but now it was eclipsed by something else. Something Javier couldn't immediately name. I can get you in. Not as a guest, as a worker. A shadow in the wings. But you must swear to me, Javier. You will not be the bull in the china shop. His stage is a holy place to him. If you charge in, you will get her killed. You must be El Sombra. You must watch. You must wait for the right moment. I will, Javier promised, though the promise felt like a lie in his own mouth. The urge to smash, to break, to tear this El Maestro apart with his bare hands was a physical force. He holds his rehearsals in the old caves up in Sacromonte, Ricardo said, giving him a location. Go there first. See for yourself what you are up against. Then we will speak again. Ricardo picked up his guitar, his fingers finding the strings again, but the music was gone. All that came out was a discordant, mournful sound, like a soul in torment. Javier left him there, a ghost communing with his instrument, and walked out into the encroaching twilight, the name Sacromonte echoing in his mind. The Sacromonte caves were wounds in the hillside, ancient dwellings that had pulsed with the rhythm of flamenco for centuries. As Javier approached the location, Ricardo had described a larger, more secluded cave set apart from the others. He felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The joyous, chaotic energy of the other caves faded, replaced by a disciplined, almost monastic silence. A heavy, iron-studded door blocked the entrance. There was no sound from within. Javier circled the perimeter, his matador's senses on high alert. He found a small, grimy window set high in the rock face, likely for ventilation. Hoisting himself up, he peered into the gloom. The interior was a stark contrast to a typical Fiery Times tableau asterisk. The stone walls were bare, the floor a polished, dark wood, scarred and battered from countless hours of practice. There were no chairs, no tables, only a single oppressive silence. In the center of the floor, under a harsh, single spotlight, stood a half-dozen dancers. They were skeletal, their faces gaunt, their eyes shadowed with a profound exhaustion that went beyond the physical. They moved through a complex sequence of steps, their technical precision breathtaking. But there was no joy, no passion. They were beautiful, broken puppets. And then he saw him. El Maestro. He wasn't the monster Javier had imagined. He was a man of unassuming height, dressed in simple black. His face was sharp, intelligent, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and eyes that burned with a terrifying intensity. He didn't shout or command. He spoke in a low, mesmerizing voice, circling his dancers like a wolf. He would stop, adjust a dancer's hand with the delicacy of a surgeon, whisper something in their ear, and Javier could see the effect even from a distance. The dancer would flinch, their eyes would widen in fear or shame, and then their movements would become sharper, more desperate. He was not choreographing their bodies, he was dissecting their souls. Javier's gaze searched for Sofia. He found her at the edge of the group, and his breath caught in his throat. She was thinner, her vibrant energy banked to a low, dangerous ember. But as he watched, El Maestro approached her. He didn't touch her. He simply stood before her, his burning gaze fixed on hers. "The fear, Sofia," his voice carried, hypnotic and cruel. "The fear of the fall. It is a gift. Most people spend their lives running from it. The artist must embrace it, dance with it, let it consume you. Your brother, the great El Sombra, he knew that fear. He stood inches from death and made it beautiful. But then he faltered. He let fear win. Are you going to be like him? A coward who ran away from his own truth?" Javier felt the words like a physical blow. The man was using him, using his own tragedy as a psychological scalpel on his sister. He watched as Sofia's face hardened, her chin lifted in defiance. She launched into a solo, a furious, breathtaking display of time's Zapatiado asterisk. Her feet hammered the floor, a staccato rhythm of rage and pain. It was brilliant, it was magnificent, and it was utterly, completely wrong. This wasn't art born of passion, it was a desperate attempt to outrun a demon. Javier dropped from the window, his knuckles white. Ricardo was right. Charging in would be a disaster. El Maestro's control was absolute. He wasn't just a choreographer. He was the creator and god of this small, terrifying world. To defeat him, Javier couldn't just enter his world. He had to enter his stage. He met Ricardo the next day. The old guitarist looked as if he hadn't slept, his face etched with a fresh layer of despair. "You saw?" Ricardo asked. "I saw," Javier confirmed. "The performance. When and where?" "Tomorrow night. In the Cueva de la Verdad," Ricardo said, naming a deep, notorious cave rarely used for performances. "I have arranged it. You will be helping with the lights backstage. You will be invisible, a shadow." He handed Javier a small, crumpled piece of paper with an address and a time. "Why are you doing this, Ricardo?" Javier asked, his eyes searching the old man's face. "What do you get out of it?" Ricardo's gaze flickered, and for the first time, Javier saw the truth he had missed, the thing he couldn't name before. It wasn't fear or pity, it was hunger, a desperate, ravenous hunger. "He is a monster, Javier," Ricardo said, his voice a low, trembling confession. "He destroys beauty. But God help me. For a single moment, when one of them touches that edge, the times Duende times is real. It's like hearing the voice of God. I am a weak man, an addict. I left him because I feared for my soul. I am helping you because I fear for your sister. But I also have to see it again. I have to know if he can really do it. If he can create the ultimate masterpiece with her." The betrayal was not a knife in the back. It was a slow, cold poison. Ricardo wasn't a false ally in the traditional sense. He was worse. He was a willing spectator at his sister's execution, hoping for a beautiful corpse. Javier's hand shot out, grabbing the front of Ricardo's shirt, pulling the frail man close. "If anything happens to her," Javier snarled, his voice a low growl of compressed fury, "your soul will be the last of your worries." He released him, disgusted. Ricardo stumbled back, clutching his guitar like a shield. He was just another ghost, haunted and weak. Javier was on his own. The Cueva de la Verdad was less a cave and more a cathedral of rock, its vast chamber lit by flickering candlelight that threw distorted shadows onto the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, Cuban cigars, and damp earth. The audience was a collection of the city's elite, their faces bored and expectant, connoisseurs of sensation seeking a new, more potent thrill. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices like the rustling of dry leaves. Javier, dressed in the black garb of a stagehand, moved through the shadows of the wings. He could feel the oppressive weight of anticipation. This wasn't a performance. It was a ritual. He saw Ricardo in a corner, hunched over his guitar, his face pale and slick with sweat. He wouldn't meet Javier's eyes. Then, a hush fell over the crowd. El Maestro stepped onto the stage, a small, circular wooden platform in the center of the cave. He didn't bow or acknowledge the audience. He simply raised a hand, and the whispers ceased. His power was absolute. "Art is not a comfort," he began, his voice a mesmerizing cadence that filled the cavern. "It is a fire. It is a blade. Tonight, we will not witness a performance. We will witness a birth. The birth of true times, Duende asterisk, from the crucible of a mortal soul pushed beyond its limits." He stepped back into the darkness, and a single searing spotlight hit the center of the stage. Sophia appeared. A collective gasp went through the audience. She was breathtaking. She wore a simple, blood-red dress. Her face was a mask of sublime tragedy, her eyes huge and dark, but utterly vacant, looking at something far beyond the cavern walls. There was no fear, no anger, no passion left in them. There was only a terrifying, hollow perfection. Ricardo began to play. The music was a lament, a heartbreaking melody that seemed to weep in the silent cave, and Sophia began to dance. It was the most technically flawless flamenco Javier had ever seen. Every movement was precise, every line of her body perfect, every stamp of her heel a sharp, cracking thunderclap. But it was a horrifying perfection. It was the perfection of a machine, of a body running on the last dregs of will, an engine burning itself out. She wasn't dancing, she was being danced. Her body was a vessel for El Maestro's obsessive vision. Javier watched, his heart a stone in his chest. He could see the slight tremor in her hands, the sheen of sweat that was not from exertion but from a body in systemic shock. He saw the subtle falter in her breath, the minute pause before a dizzyingly fast turn. To the audience, it was part of the drama. To Javier, it was the unmistakable sign of a bull weakening, of a fighter about to collapse. She was literally dancing herself to death. He looked at El Maestro, who stood in the shadows at the edge of the stage, his face ecstatic, enraptured. He was the matador, guiding his charge through its final, beautiful, agonizing moments. The audience was mesmerized, leaning forward, their faces bathed in the stage light, caught in the hypnotic spell. Rushing the stage was suicide. It would break the illusion, yes, but the shock could push Sophia's overstrained system over the edge. A shout, a struggle, it would be a clumsy, brutish interruption. El Maestro would win, portraying him as a vandal who had destroyed a masterpiece. He couldn't fight him on the physical plane, he had to fight him on the stage. Javier the Matador understood. You do not fight the Matador. You fight for the attention of the bull, and in this arena, the audience was the bull. He stripped off his stagehand's jacket, leaving him in his plain black shirt and trousers. He took a deep breath, banishing the grief, the rage, the fear. He summoned the ghost of El Sombra, the man who could command a plaza of 50,000 people with a single silent gesture. He had to steal the stage. He stepped from the absolute darkness of the wings into the penumbra at the edge of the light. He didn't run. He walked. A slow, deliberate, predatory walk. Heads began to turn. A ripple of confusion went through the audience. Who was this? This was not part of the performance. El Maestro's eyes snapped towards him, his ecstatic trance broken by a flash of pure fury. Ricardo's music faltered, a string buzzing with his uncertainty. Javier didn't look at El Maestro. He didn't look at Sofia. He looked at the audience, his gaze sweeping across their faces, meeting their eyes one by one. It was the matador's gaze, the one that acknowledges the crowd, that draws their power, that makes them part of the drama. He held their attention, his presence a stark, masculine counterpoint to Sofia's agonizing grace. He walked to the very edge of the stage, a dark, silent monolith. Sofia, deep in her trance, continued her frantic, beautiful dance of death. The two rhythms, her frantic times, zapateado times, and his silent, powerful presence, created a jarring dissonance. The spell was fraying. Javier raised one foot. He held it there for a single, breath-stealing moment of absolute silence. In that moment, he was not Javier Vargas, the broken bookseller. He was El Sombra, in the Times Querencia asterisk, the point of power in the ring. The entire cave, every soul within it, was focused on that suspended foot. Then he brought it down, asterisk, Pam, asterisk. The sound was not a dance step. It was a gunshot, a verdict, a declaration of war. It was a single, explosive times, golpe asterisk, delivered with the full weight of his body and his will. The sound cracked through the hypnotic music, shattering the rhythm, violating the sacred space. It broke the spell. Sofia faltered, her eyes blinking. The hollowness receded, replaced by a flicker of confused recognition. She saw him. "Javier?" she whispered, her voice a raw croak. The audience, shocked out of their artistic trance, now saw the scene for what it was. Not a sublime birth of Time's Duende asterisk, but a sick, cruel spectacle. They saw a gaunt, exhausted young woman in a red dress, swaying on the verge of collapse. They saw a dark, obsessive man in the shadows, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. They saw the ugly human truth. El Maestro's power had resided entirely in the audience's complicity, in their willingness to believe in his profane ritual. With that belief shattered, he was nothing. Just a pathetic man whose masterpiece had been spoiled. Sofia's legs gave out. Javier was there before she hit the floor, sweeping her up into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, her body burning with fever. He held her close, shielding her from the now murmuring, ashamed audience. He turned and looked at El Maestro one last time. The man didn't move. He just stared at the empty space on the stage where his creation had been. His face a canvas of utter desolation. He was a god whose temple had just been desecrated. Javier carried his sister out of the cave, leaving El Maestro to the silence and his empty stage. He passed Ricardo, who was staring at his own hands, at the guitar that had been accomplice to this horror, as if he'd never seen them before. They emerged from the mouth of the cave into the cool, clean air of the Granada night. The stars were brilliant in the black sky. Sofia stirred in his arms, her breath a faint whisper against his chest. They had survived. They had walked out of an arena darker than any bull ring and faced a monster more terrifying than any half-ton beast of muscle and horn. A monster, born not of myth or magic, but of the terrible, beautiful, and deadly obsession of the human heart. El Sombra was home, and the shadows were finally at his back.